Charles, I would say it's a terrible set of circumstances under which this is happening, but it does seem like there's at least some indication that the murder of Charlie Kirk is finally motivating the Department of Justice to go after some of these funding sources that you've been telling us about for almost 10 years. You've been working on it for more than 10 years, these non-profit conglomerates. How you doing, Charles?
I'm doing well, Jason. Thanks for asking. Hope you're well.
I am.
Yeah, the loss of somebody like a Charlie Kirk is really painful, clearly for his family, his friends, but for the whole discourse in the United States of America. It is not okay to hit somebody, to kill somebody with whom you disagree. It's just not okay. And it'd be one thing if you were to pick on, let's say, Ann Coulter, somebody I've spent time with in the past, who is smart, but who in her prime of her career would make headlines and get on TV for saying incendiary things and mocking the opposition, not necessarily trying to fix anything, but just pointing out the defects of the opposition. That's not what and I'm not saying Ann Coulter deserves to be hit or shot, but, or anybody for that matter deserves to be hit or shot. But Charlie Kirk had a novel approach as a young man. I think he started in this at 18. He developed this game plan and turning point to host these meetings around the country, and indeed in some foreign locations, where he would invite people who disagreed with him. He'd give them the platform, hand them the microphone, and say, "Work away. Tell me what you think." And then, after he gave them first a chance to speak and showed them the respect and dignity of letting them speak uninterrupted, then he would engage, often turning around the person in question, and very frequently gaining major league adherence out of his growing audience. So that's a very different business model and operating model. And it's such a shame, on the one hand, that we've lost him. But I do believe in what some of the people have been saying in various sound bites, that by executing Charlie Kirk, you've created tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe more, of people who have looked at this and said, now, wait a minute. What Charlie Kirk was doing was noble. I want to be Charlie Kirk. I'm going to take up his footsteps or try to live up to his ideals. And you're seeing that in the statistic that apparently, I think it had 4,000 chapters, and already some 30 plus thousand, maybe more, people have signed up to create new chapters. And this is, a week into this. So what a horror. And what's really, I disagree with those who say that somebody doesn't have the right to say hateful things about Charlie Kirk. You have that right in the United States of America. But your employer has the right to say, well, you weren't saying this kind of stuff when we hired you. And your friends have the right to say, this is the first time we've heard this from you. So yes, you have a right to say this, but there are consequences for saying what you've been saying, these various people. And I think good on the various employers around the world, frankly, who are firing these people who would dare to gloat about what had happened and would dare to suggest that others needed to be put on lists and executed. I mean, this is very, very far away from declaring war, right? I mean, just because you disagree with somebody does not mean you have the right, as I say, to hit them or let alone kill them. And so Charlie Kirk's memory will live on. Unfortunately, he will not. He's gone. And you think about, I was trying to think about how to explain this to somebody on the other side. And the way I might try to start by explaining is, let's assume, and let's scroll forward here, that one of Charlie's kids is now, let's say, 12 years old. How are you going to explain to that 12-year-old the behavior of this person or persons unknown who may have conspired to kill her father for what he believed in? How are you going to explain that? The only way to explain that is, I think, on the one hand, to say there are people who are mentally ill, who are not monitored closely enough, and who engage in this outrageous behavior for which they will eventually get punished. And there's no good way to explain to this young person why it was Charlie's turn to suffer this fate. But on balance, I would hope by the time either one of these children get to be 12, I picked 12 because that's a very impressionable age where you're between being a child and a young woman. Emotions are raging all the different ways. Some days you want to be thought of as a little girl. Some days you want to be thought of as, as a teen. And you're very confused oftentimes. So life is not fair, unfortunately. And Charlie's life has been ended way too short, way too quickly, rather. But out of this, we can only hope that a lot of good is going to come. I think it's interesting, perhaps coincidental, that he would have named his organization Turning Point. I think this may be more than a turning point. It may be a tipping point in the debate, where the young people in America have already swung towards a conservative economic pole. They're not necessarily conservative socially, but they're certainly conservative economically. That's before the Charlie Kirk execution. And I think you're going to see, in this rising population bubble, I think you're going to see a lot of people reject wokeism, reject this, certainly this sort of behavior, and think more deeply and constructively about how they can make a difference in our country and other countries around the world. So it's a tragic loss in Charlie's case, but I think already we're seeing signs that society will end up being a lot better off. And I think it's good to see how many different people, allegedly from very different walks of life on the political spectrum, are embracing the notion of mentoring Charlie's family, not so much just with money, but also with attention and thoughtfulness. That's a very moving thing to see. So I think Charlie Kirk followed me on Twitter, and I know I followed him. It's such a tragedy. And then to think, when you see how many different people have put up hateful comments, it's a lot, Jason, like the day when you and I on a Saturday, when Brett Baer at Fox called the 2020 election for Biden. Moments later, you and I were out across Lower Manhattan, watching carloads of people and sidewalks streets full of people embrace the notion that feeble Joe Biden was, the selection of feeble Joe Biden was a good thing for this country. There are a lot of people, a lot of bitter and twisted people who don't bother to get into the facts, who don't bother to think for themselves, and who as a group have been making very bad decisions. So that's on Charlie. I really can't say enough, and I don't want to be too maudlin, but on the title that the art department came up with under your direction of this show, I think we're finally beginning to see just how ugly the business model of charity fraud is, and just how simple it has been for people, chiefly on the left, although there are many bad actors on the right, the American Conservative Union and the American Conservative Union Foundation being two prime examples, how easy it has been to game the IRS, to game the FBI, to allow crooked foundations to spread a lot of money around to actors who are never disciplined, who are not monitored properly, who have been engaging really, in some cases, certainly in the Charlie Kirk execution, in terrorism, aided by the lax regulation of the 501c3 and 4 in particular organizations by the IRS, FBI, and others. So maybe out of all this, we will see a sea change. Maybe the example set by the Clinton Foundation, the Bush Foundations, other presidential foundations, the notoriously ridiculous Obama Foundation, the example set where they do whatever the hell they want, raise far more money than they need to build their libraries, never really account for what they're doing, allow that money to flow in the Obama and Clinton cases towards these horrible incendiary outfits that are not at all properly monitored, and that throw gasoline on the fires of raging youths. Maybe out of all this, we're going to see them finally get up there and say, you know what, enough is enough. let's regulate this. Let's just use the laws on the books, and let's examine, importantly, why the FBI has given a pass to so many far left organizations, George Soros, the list is endless, No Kings, all that stuff, BLM. Why has the FBI given a pass to them when they demonstrated in 2010 and afterwards how easy it was to target right-leaning organizations, in the case of Tea Party applicants and organizations? Why the double standard? Who's responsible for it? Let's bring those people to justice.
Yeah. No, you're right, Charles. I mean, there's so many of these things, these 501c3s that are, you've been telling us about them for a long, long time. I don't want to move off of the Charlie Kirk subject, and of course we'll come back to that throughout the discussion. But, you and I briefly spoke about this lawsuit that was filed just 2 days ago here. This is Maureen Comey versus the United States Department of Justice and, of course, the Executive Office of the President. I haven't yet fully understood what the difference is between suing the Executive Office of the President and suing Donald Trump in his capacity as president. But, plaintiff Maureen Comey is suing for getting fired. This is the new, she's been an exemplary employee with Diddy Combs and Jeffrey Epstein and all these other people who never really were properly brought to justice, and also her stupid father. But the thing that's interesting about this from the standpoint of our topic today is that it's backed by this protect democracy thing. Let's see, where did I see that here? So somewhere in here they're talking about protect democracy, but it's another one of these.
Is it protect democracy or protect kleptocracy? I mean,
Yeah. Well, it's another one of these things that's structured like, it's almost like they've got a recipe. We've seen a multitude of these lawsuits with Norm Eisen and other people like him and affiliated with him, where they have a 501c3 and a 501c4, and they are, at best going through loopholes to circumvent the intentions of these laws, if not expressly violating the law.
Well, yeah, just for our viewers, 501c3s are not supposed to engage in partisan political activities. They're not supposed to favor or oppose a political candidate. They may engage in lobbying. They may, engage in lobbying, but they have to disclose how they're doing that. And the disclosure requirements are somewhat onerous. C4s, on the other hand, C3s, the donations made to C3s are tax deductible, whereas the donations made to C4s are not tax deductible by the donor. And C4s can engage in political activities. But what you're referring to, I think, are these examples where the same groups of people set up twinned C3s and C4s that share office space and share telephone numbers and share personnel, share directors, oftentimes paying the actors inside, the operational people out of both pockets, and don't really do a good job to be generous to them, segregating and properly accounting for their overlapping activities. And that really should be a no-no. You should be able, whether it's a right-leaning group or a left-leaning group, you should not be able to do this. If you want to be tax exempt and have your donors get tax deductions for their donations, you should be wholly separate, I believe, from a C4 in every way, shape, and form. You shouldn't be allowed to share office space. You shouldn't be allowed to do any of this stuff. And, the notion that the people engaged in these activities really count the minutes in their workday and are careful to say, well, this day I spent, 22.5% of my time on the C3 and the balance and 50% on the C4 and whatever at furry conferences. They really don't do that. And of course, the IRS claims that it doesn't have the resources to do anything, even though Joe Biden and others, amped up the staffing and funding for the IRS. This is a window that has been open for too long. It needs to be shut. And as I say, the rules that are on the books here need to be enforced, and they're not. Now, one good sign there, Jason, is that a number of different employees who have been in the IRS or had been in the IRS through and after the period where conservatives were targeted, starting in 2000, I would argue 9 and 10. Holly Paz was one of those people, and she was, I think, in the Cincinnati office or overseeing the Cincinnati office of the IRS, which was blamed for the excesses of 2010 and following. I think she was either put on leave or actually fired. I think Robert Choi, another one, CHOI, may also have been put on leave. He was very guilty, I think, of abusing his authority and responsibilities. And the problem is that within the IRS and the Department of Justice and other places, there are way too many employees who attempt to mask their partisan political biases. And you can't have that in the Justice Department, and you can't have that in the IRS. You can't have people with discretion decide they're going to use the awesome resources that are available, particularly now with AI and tech, to paid for by the government, to go after somebody who's a rival or an enemy politically. You can't be doing that. No, and today we're not making an example of these people. I mean, you look at the odious Eric Holder, who was as a longtime Democrat hack, who was a disaster in the Clinton Justice Department. He had responsibility for overseeing the pardons. He let a bunch of bad pardons slip through. Not just Mark Rich and Pincus Green, but the FALN, the Puerto Rican terrorist bombers, that woman, what's her name? I forget her name now. Susan Rosenberg, who actually blew up federal property. Give those people pardons, then go in as AG, Attorney General for Barack Obama, and brag when asked that you are Barack Obama's wingman, then get involved in numerous scandals, including the sending guns across the southern border scandal, Fast and Furious, gets censured by Congress, and then have the gall to say that you wear that censure as a badge of honor. When Peter Navarro had to go to prison for being censured by Congress and or held in contempt of Congress, and Steve Bannon and others. I mean, the system is obviously, as it's organized now, it is obviously biased in favor of the left and against the right. And here I'm speaking economically, not really socially, economic rightists. And this has to change. And I think this tragedy out there in Utah may actually usher in some change. I expect Donald Trump on Sunday at the memorial for Charlie, I expect him to make an issue of some of these things, and maybe before then.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be quite a thing. The security at that event, I imagine, is going to be on their tiptoes. It's going to be everybody under the sun there, Trump and J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah, it's a lot of people have been saying that this is really like a JFK moment for this new generation, and it really is, because I think things like that, and I mean, look, now even 9/11 is like ancient history to somebody who's 25. They were one when that happened.
Right. It really is. And also, in 9/11 was 2001. This country economically is in a lot worse shape today than it was in 2001. With our towering debts, we don't even really know how big they are because the government doesn't account for anything properly. They use cash basis accounting, which is something most corporations are not allowed to use. So we don't really know how big our liabilities are. The figure 37 trillion is thrown around. That's a big number. And even now under Trump, they can't balance the budget, or they can't make moves in the right direction. So our financial flexibility has been constrained. And then internationally, pick a project that we haven't, excuse my language, fucked up internationally since 1988, maybe since 1945. So nation is pressed financially, engaged in too many foreign entanglements, some of which are not going well at all. And I was talking to people. I'm not going to say what country I'm in, but some pretty influential people here, and they were pressing me on Trump. What do I think of Trump and this and that? And I said, I'm hopeful that Trump and his team, even though it includes some people I think who are pretty weak, I'm hopeful that team can make a go of it for the good. And as far as our foreign policy is concerned, if you have shit relations with your two neighboring countries, Canada and Mexico, shouldn't that give you a little cause for concern? I mean, shouldn't you be saying, wait a minute, with Canada, we're barely on speaking terms. With Mexico, we're close to war. And this is a nation that should then say, because we've done such a good job with the two countries that actually share a border with us, we should think that we have the skill to go around the world and insert ourselves using bases in 150 countries out of 200, multiple bases in many places. That we've done such a bad job close to home. Let's spread the party as far as it goes. I mean, this should be a time of introspection on our foreign policy, not expansion.
But Charles, don't you think a little bit of the problem with Canada is that, I mean, they're kind of being, not the people, but the government, absolute dicks with regard to the First Amendment. Well, obviously Canada doesn't have a First Amendment, but, free speech, and, they've just become this kind of totalitarian society. They had a granddaughter of a Nazi as the deputy prime minister, and even honored a Nazi, a actual living Nazi in Parliament of Canada. It's almost like they've skidded off the rails. It's funny. I was looking at some, I don't know, maybe Instagram or something, where I have some old people from my life in the film world. And there's this one guy I know who's a Canadian filmmaker who had all this positive stuff about Mark Carney. And it's funny because I used to sort of think that guy, this person who I know, who I won't name, was kind of just a jerk. But now it's like, how could he possibly be for all this stuff that they're doing in Canada, where they don't let people go into the woods and they want to force people to take experimental injections, and they seem to be going in the same direction as England as far as, like putting people in jail for posting things they don't like on the internet. They had that whole teacher with the ridiculous, huge fake boobs.
Well, wasn't Carney really good in the Honeymooners? Oh no, this is a different Carney. Sorry. No, I think
Art Carney.
Yeah, who your friend, right? Yeah. So the notion that a guy from England, which is Mark Carney, who had been governor of the Bank of England, would be slotted in to become the leader of Canada after Castro's son had done such a poor job up there. I'm not saying it reflects poorly on us that we have poor relations with Canada and Mexico. I'm saying that that it should give us pause about stepping into far more complicated international relations if we can't, manage things well close to home. What makes us think that we're going to do well in conflicts in the Middle East, for example, that go back centuries, if not millennia in certain cases? I mean, we're spread too thin internationally. And on the Canada in particular, I mean, I would be taking, and this probably wouldn't get me very much closer to the leadership of either country. In Canada, I'd be saying, listen, guys, in the first instance, you have a tenth the population of the United States. Your GDP is much smaller than we are. There are countries out there that have gone from a much lower base to a far higher place than you. You have too much representation. You shouldn't be in the G8, G7 now. You shouldn't have, outsized roles in NATO or anywhere else. And that's before we get into whether we share values with you. I mean, it's important. Freedom of speech is extremely important. As I say, freedom of speech means you could say virtually what you want. We don't have freedom of consequences for that speech, but people are encouraged to speak their mind. And sometimes they're out of their minds, and they get severely punished for what they say. But you really can't, you shouldn't be constraining the ability of people to express opinions, which Canada certainly has done. And the other things you talk about are very scary. I don't want to go to Canada. I don't want to visit it. I wouldn't encourage anybody I know to go there until this is sorted out. With regard to Mexico, it was a dangerous place before it became almost a narco state, which it could well be today. You know, I would have been sending as president a delegation down to the Scheinbaum, or whatever her first name is, I forget, president of Mexico. And I'd say, listen, our operating presumption is that your government is in thrall to the cartels. Prove to me that that isn't the case.
Exactly. We're going to step over to the First Amendment Forum right here. I want to talk to you some more about Canada and the long-standing heritage with the Trudeau family and their love of Mao and all that kind of stuff. But people are going to be able to join us on crowdsourcethetruth.substack.com and subscribestar.com and patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We'll be right back. There's a lot more to discuss. Thanks to everybody who is sponsoring.